History has always treated animals with a mix of reverence, utility, and absolute unadulterated madness. We've used them as soldiers, fashion statements, and even literal pieces of technology. This is a deep dive into the moments where humanity looked at a living creature and decided to make things weird. From chickens and rose-tinted eyewear to baboons with government jobs, we are counting down 10 of the most unhinged animal-human interactions in the history of our species. Number 1. The hen with the rose-colored glasses. In the mid-20th century, the American agricultural landscape was facing a crisis that sounded like a fever dream. The pecking order had turned into a literal bloodbath. In the high-density environments of 1950s poultry farms, chickens, who were naturally attracted to the color red, were becoming cannibalistic. The sight of a single drop of blood on a fellow bird would trigger a frenzied collective attack. Farmers were losing millions of birds to what was essentially a feathery version of a slasher movie. The solution was not better feed or more space, but a bizarre foray into avian ophthalmology. Enter the chicken sunglasses. Farmers began purchasing millions of pairs of tiny rose-colored plastic lenses. These weren't just a stylistic choice, they were a psychological hack. By filtering out the color red, the glasses made it impossible for the hens to see blood. To a chicken wearing these, every bird looked like a harmless, rosy blur. The aggression vanished instantly. Some models were so elaborate they clipped into the bird's nostrils with a metal pin, requiring a fitting process that turned the farm into a surreal optical clinic. For years, the American countryside was populated by tens of thousands of hens, looking like they were waiting for a low-budget disco to start, proving that humanity's first instinct for conflict resolution is often weird eyewear. Number 2. The reptilian air conditioner. Long before the invention of the electric fan or the luxury of Freon, the elite of ancient Rome had to contend with Mediterranean summers that could turn a marble villa into an oven. While the wealthy could afford slaves to wave palm fronds, the truly fashion-forward Roman ladies sought a more intimate, high-tech solution for the heat. They turned to the reptile kingdom. The snake scarf became a legitimate cooling accessory for the Roman upper class. These were not venomous vipers, of course, but large, docile snakes chosen specifically for their temperature. Because snakes are ectothermic, their bodies remain naturally cool to the touch as long as they aren't basking in direct sun. A woman would drape a live snake around her neck or wrap it around her wrists like a pulsing, breathing bracelet. The snake's skin provided a constant, chilling sensation against the human pulse points, functioning as a primitive form of portable air conditioning. In a society that already normalized public baths and lead-sweetened wine, walking into a dinner party with a living reptile around your throat wasn't considered insane, it was a status symbol. It was fashion, utility, and a mild safety hazard, all rolled into a cold-blooded package. Number 3. Jack, the signalman baboon. In the late 19th century, history produced one of its most functional buddy cop duos in the South African railway system. James Wide, a signalman known as Jumper because of his habit of leaping between moving trains, tragically lost both of his legs in a work accident. Determined to keep his livelihood, he purchased a chacma baboon named Jack. What started as a simple helper-animal relationship quickly evolved into a legitimate professional partnership. Jack didn't just push James to work in a custom trolley, he actually learned the job. Under James's tutelage, Jack learned how to operate the heavy iron levers that controlled the railway signals. He memorized the whistles of incoming locomotives and knew exactly which switch to pull for which train. When the railway authorities eventually discovered that a primate was in charge of several tons of moving steam and steel, they staged a formal competency test, fully expecting a disaster. Instead, Jack performed perfectly, without a single hesitation. The Cape Government Railways was so impressed, they gave Jack an official employment number and a salary of 20 cents a day, plus a weekly ration of beer. Jack worked for 9 years without a single error, maintaining a safety record that put his human colleagues to shame. Number 4. The aristocratic game of fox tossing.
If you ever feel that modern entertainment has reached a low point, consider the 17th century European sport of Fuchsprellen, or fox tossing. This wasn't a rough game played by bored peasants in the woods. It was the height of refined entertainment for the absolute elite of Saxony and Prussia. It was the ultimate party game for people with too much inherited wealth and an alarming lack of empathy. The setup was simple. Two participants would stand about 20 feet apart, each holding one end of a long, narrow fabric sling laid flat on the ground. A live fox, or sometimes a badger or a wildcat, would be released into the arena. As the terrified animal ran across the sling, the players would yank their ends upward with all their might. A skilled pair of tossers could launch a fox over 25 feet into the air. High society events would involve hundreds of animals being catapulted simultaneously. Augustus the Strong, a famous elector of Saxony, was known to hold massive fox-tossing contests in his courtyard, where nobles in silk coats and powdered wigs would compete for height and grace. It was a spectacular display of aristocratic boredom that serves as a grim reminder of what happens when the ruling class has zero hobbies and too much time on their hands.
Number 5. Project X-ray, the bat bombs. During the height of World War II, a Pennsylvania dentist named Lytle Adams approached the U.S. government with a plan so absurd it could only have been born from a mid-century obsession with total warfare. His idea was to weaponize the common Mexican free-tailed bat. The theory was that because Japanese cities were largely constructed of wood and paper, thousands of small, simultaneous fires would be more effective than a few large bombs. The military actually funded this. Project X-ray involved attaching tiny, timed incendiary devices, essentially miniature napalm bombs, to the chests of hibernating bats. The plan was to drop them from a plane in a large carrier. As the carrier fell, the bats would wake up, disperse, and fly into the dark eaves and attics of buildings to roost for the day. At a predetermined time, the timers would go off, setting the entire city ablaze from the inside out. The project was moving along until a group of armed bats escaped during a test in New Mexico and accidentally burned down a U.S. Army general's car and a brand new airfield hangar. Despite the accidental success, the project was shelved in favor of the Manhattan Project. It remains a bizarre what-if of history, a vision of a world where the war was won not by physics, but by thousands of explosive-laden rodents of the sky. Number 6. Pigs on trial. Medieval justice. In the legal landscape of medieval and early modern Europe, justice was a serious, dramatic, and often incredibly strange business. If a crime was committed, someone or something had to pay to restore the moral order. This led to the phenomenon of formal animal trials. Pigs were the most frequent defendants, primarily because they lived in close proximity to humans and were occasionally prone to wandering into homes and injuring children. These were not lynch mobs. These were full, high court proceedings. A pig accused of a crime would be formally arrested and placed in the same jail as human criminals. The animal would be assigned a defense lawyer, often a high-ranking legal professional, who would argue the pig's lack of criminal intent or blame its upbringing. Witnesses were summoned to testify about the pig's character. If found guilty of a serious crime like murder, the pig could be sentenced to death. In some recorded cases, the pig was even dressed in a human coat and breeches before being led to the gallows to be publicly hanged. It was a world where humans were so obsessed with the theater of the law that they spent weeks of taxpayer money litigating against a sow. Number 7. The lace-smuggling dogs. In the 19th century, the border between Belgium and France was a hotbed of economic warfare. The French government had placed massive tariffs on high-quality Belgian lace to protect their own industry, making it an incredibly expensive luxury. Where there is high tax, there is high-level smuggling, and the criminals of the era turned to man's best friend to transport their contraband. Smugglers developed a method that was as ingenious as it was fluffy.
They would take large, sturdy dogs and shave them down to the skin. They would then wrap several layers of fine lace, sometimes worth a fortune, tightly around the dog's torso. To hide the cargo, they would fit the dog with a custom-made outer fur coat or even the skin of a larger dog, making the animal look like a slightly overweight but otherwise normal pet. These dogs were then trained to run across the border at night, avoiding the main roads and the guards. Since border agents weren't in the habit of frisking every dog that trotted by, the scheme was wildly successful. For decades, the luxury lace economy of France was quite literally carried on the backs of thousands of confused, over-wrapped canines. Number 8. The cold-blooded milk preserver. Before the 20th century brought the miracle of the electric refrigerator, keeping dairy products from spoiling was a daily struggle, especially in the rural reaches of Russia and Finland. While salt and ice were options for some, the locals had a much more swamp-based solution for the problem of sour milk. They reached for a frog. The practice involved dropping a live brown common frog directly into a bucket of fresh milk. It sounds like a cruel prank or a piece of rural superstition, but modern chemical analysis has proven that the frog method was actually a sophisticated form of biological preservation. To survive in bacteria-rich environments, certain frogs secrete antimicrobial peptides, small proteins, through their skin. These secretions act as a powerful natural antibiotic that prevents the growth of the specific bacteria that causes milk to ferment and sour. To a Russian peasant, seeing a pair of eyes peeking out of the milk jug was a small price to pay for dairy that lasted an extra 3 days in the summer heat. It was a practical, if slightly horrifying, example of humanity using nature as a kitchen appliance.
Number 9. Corporal Wojtek, the soldier bear. In 1942, a group of Polish soldiers traveling through Iran encountered a young boy with an orphaned Syrian brown bear cub. They bought the bear, named him Wojtek, which means joyful warrior, and raised him as one of their own. As Wojtek grew, he didn't just become a mascot, he became a soldier. To get him onto a British transport ship, the Polish army officially enlisted him. He was given a rank, a serial number, and a formal payroll. Wojtek lived the full soldier life. He slept in the tents with the men, drank beer from bottles, and even learned how to salute. During the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino in Italy, Wojtek made history by helping his unit carry heavy crates of 25-pound artillery shells from the supply trucks to the guns. This was a job that usually required 4 adult men, but the 500-pound bear handled it with ease, never dropping a single shell. His bravery was so legendary that the 22nd Artillery Supply Company changed their official emblem to a bear carrying a shell. After the war, Wojtek retired to the Edinburgh Zoo, where he lived out his days as a celebrity. He was frequently visited by his old army comrades, who would toss him cigarettes and speak to him in Polish, a bear who was, for all intents and purposes, a veteran of World War II. Number 10. The 19th century flea circus. The Victorian era had a peculiar obsession with micro-spectacles and the triumph of human will over nature. This fascination reached its peak and its weirdest point with the rise of the flea circus. Master showmen would take common human fleas and, using the precision tools of watchmakers, harness them with invisible gold wires. These fleas were trained to perform acts that seemed to defy their nature. Because a flea can pull roughly 160,000 times its own body weight, they were attached to tiny, scale-model brass carriages, cannons, and bicycles. Audiences would pay significant sums to sit in a darkened room and watch through magnifying glasses as the great Brutus pulled a chariot across a velvet stage. Some stars were even given tiny swords and made to duel one another. While it was more a feat of mechanical engineering and animal cruelty than actual training, the flea circus was a massive hit in the courts of Europe.
It was the ultimate example of the 19th century mindset. If it exists, no matter how small or parasitic, we can make it wear a tiny hat and perform for our amusement. From the battlefield to the dining table, humans have spent thousands of years proving that we have no idea where the line is when it comes to the animal kingdom. Whether we were putting pigs in suits or bats in bombs, history is a reminder that we are the weirdest species on the planet. Animals have been our co-workers, our cooling fans, and our microscopic circus stars.